Call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the Committee of Adjustment meeting of January 8th, 2019, first one of the year. My name is Mario Russo, Committee Chair. This is a meeting of the Committee of Adjustment. The Committee of Adjustment is composed of 5 citizen members who are appointed by Brampton City Council. The committee is authorized by the Ontario Planning Act to consider applications for minor variances from the provisions of the City of Brampton zoning bylaw. The committee also considers applications for consent, sometimes referred to as land division applications, which include severing a new lot from an existing lot, a lot addition, easements, mortgages, or leases in excess of 21 years. My first request is to ask those present to ensure that all cell phones and other electronic devices are turned off or placed in a non-audible mode during the meeting. I'd like to first introduce the committee members. To my immediate right, member Mr. Ron Chadha. To my far right, member Mr. Richard Nurse. To my immediate left, member Mr. Robert Crouch. Ms. Desiree Doffler is sent her regrets. And again, my name is Mario Russo. Seated at the table in front of the committee, or to the right of the committee, is Ms. Jeannie Myers, Secretary Treasurer of the Committee of Adjustment. And seated near the podium, we have city staff members who will assist the committee today. Staff, can I please get your introductions?
Krista Walkie, Manager of Development Services.
Dina Jenkins, Development Planner.
And I'm Elizabeth Corazola, Manager of Zoning and Sign Bylaw Services.
Stephen Dykstra, Development Planner.
Thank you. Before we consider today's applications, the committee has some procedural matters to take care of. Firstly, the adoption of minutes of the meeting held December 4th, 2018. The minutes of the previous meeting are presented in today's agenda. Committee members, are there any questions or concerns about these minutes? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of December 4th, 2018 as presented? Motion to approve by Mr. Nurse, seconded by Mr. Crouch. All in favor? That carries. We move on to declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Does any member have a declaration of pecuniary interest to declare on any matter being discussed today? Seeing none. Withdrawals and deferrals. I do not believe, have any written requests for deferrals or withdrawals. Is there anyone with an item being discussed today that would like to request a deferral or withdrawal? Seeing none. Quickly, for those unfamiliar with the Committee of Adjustment procedure and process, I'd like to give a brief explanation and scope. Before following some procedural matters, which we have already undergone, the Secretary Treasurer will then call the applications by announcing the application number, the name of the applicant, and the address of the property subject to the application. The applicant or authorized agent representing the applicant will then come down to the podium, state their name and address for the record, and present their application. I request that you reserve any questions or comments pertaining to the staff report until after planning staff has had an opportunity to present. If there's anyone in attendance who wishes to speak to a particular application, you will be given the opportunity to do so when the application is presented. Any decision made here today may be appealed to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, LPAT. Previously, the appeal process was dealt through the Ontario Municipal Board. However, the province has introduced new legislation in the form of Bill 139, which came into force April 3rd, 2018. Appeals may be received in the City Clerk's office associated with any minor variance or consent application, and they will be processed and forwarded to LPAT, as they were previously processed and sent to the OMB. This process may be commenced with the Secretary Treasurer by filing a completed appeal form and filing fee within the prescribed 20-day appeal period. Information pertaining to the appeal process may be obtained by contacting the Secretary Treasurer in the City Clerk's office. We now move on to new applications. Ms. Myers?
Calling applications B18028, A18008, and A18009. Wadlaska Banca. The property is located at 32 and 34 Mara Crescent.
Good morning. Thank you. I have to apologize a little bit. I'm a little under the weather today, but I hope my voice will last for as long as necessary to complete this hearing.
Many of us are as well.
My name is Anya Godek, Godek. I'm here on behalf of the owner of the two properties in question, Vladislava Banka. So the two properties are 32 and 34 Mara Crescent in Brampton. The first issue under application B18-028 is the issue of severance. These, in fact, were two separate properties. My client bought the first property in 2003, and then she bought the second property in 2008, and then the two properties merged. There have been no structural changes made to the properties, no additions, no deletions. So what we're requesting is, in fact, that we return the properties to the status in which they existed prior to my client buying the second property. And I understand the staff recommendations are to grant the application with a condition that there be an easement granted, which was in place prior to the two properties merging. The easement is for the purposes of maintenance and repair, since the setbacks are very minimal.
Any questions by committee members to the agent?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So you are prepared to re-register the easement?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Any other questions by committee members? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience here to speak on these applications? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff are in support of the applications. For the consent application, we find it does meet the test criteria established in the Planning Act. We do have two recommended conditions. One, that the easement for right-of-way purposes over the severed lands in favor of the retained lands be established in the location depicted on the plan attached to the public notice, so essentially reestablishing that previously existing easement. And two, that associated minor variance applications A19-008 and A19-009 be approved. For the minor variances against, for both of them, staff has found that they've met the tests established in the four tests established in the Planning Act, and they do recommend approval for both subject to conditions. The conditions for both applications are the same. One, that the extent of the variances be limited to that shown on the sketch attached to the public notice. Two, that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee shall render the approval null and void.
Thank you. Any questions by committee members to staff?
Through you, Mr. Chair. How did these dwelling placements get approved in the first place with the side yard setback problem?
That whole neighborhood has similar side yard setbacks, and from the plans, it looks like all the lots have similar easements, so essentially it's a zero lot line development. The parent zoning bylaw actually allows a zero lot line setback.
So that really isn't a variance then, because it's described here as a required variance.
Well, it is a variance because the recently, or past number of years ago, the city adopted the mature infill new zoning regulations that apply to older mature neighborhoods, and those essentially overrode the previous provisions that had been established in the parent zoning bylaw. So they set a higher, stricter standard for setbacks than what previously existed in the parent
So if I were
zoning bylaw.
if I were to seek a zoning letter, a zoning confirmation letter from the city of Brampton on a similar property, or either one of these individually, I'd receive, you have to go to the Committee of Adjustment?
If I may
maybe.
assist to clarify, the bylaw was amended in 2013 to increase side yard setback requirements in mature neighborhoods, this being identified as a mature neighborhood. If the lot line that had since been removed as a result of the merger, if it had continued to exist, then the side yard setbacks would have been considered to be legal non-complying with the existing bylaw. Since that lot line is now being reestablished, the setbacks, of course, have to be established to that lot line now, and as a result of the bylaw amendment, could no longer be considered legal non-complying.
Then they will have more marketable title. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Ma'am, do you agree to those conditions that have been stated?
Certainly, yes.
There are a couple other conditions that have been put forward by the Secretary Treasurer. Have you had an opportunity to review those?
I'm sorry.
I understand.
distracted.
There was a few other draft conditions that were put forward
Yes.
by the Secretary
Yes, that's
Treasurer.
correct. Yeah. And so I'll deal with number 32 first. That's parts 2 and 3. So the frontage is 8.98 meters, while the requirement is a minimum of 9 meters. And again, that's the condition in which the properties were purchased. Nothing has been changed. It was in existence prior to my client acquiring the properties. The second request that we are making is to permit an interior side yard setback of 0.21, and the requirement is 1.2 meters. Again, the structures have not been changed. These are structures that existed. This is the way the property was constructed.
And I believe we followed that through staff in your initial comment. I'm just more asking pertaining to the additional draft conditions that were put forward. Have you had an opportunity to review those conditions as well?
Actually, I've just received them this morning. Yep, those are acceptable, absolutely.
Thank you. So if there are no further conditions or questions,
Motion to approve in accordance with staff recommendations.
motion to approve with staff's recommendations by Mr. Crouch, seconded by Mr. Nurse. All in favor? That carries. They are approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Calling application A17177, AAA Holdings, Inc. The property is located at 860 North Park Drive.
Good morning, members of the committee. Happy New Year. My name is Richard Domes from Gagnon Walker Domes LTD. We represent AAA Holdings LTD, the owner of 860 North Park Drive. The approximately 2-acre property is located at the northwest corner of Dixie Road and North Park. The property is currently occupied by a one-story, 1,547-meter retail building. The property abuts residential to the west and the north, and also at north along Dixie Road, the property abuts the Mount Olivet Cemetery. The subject site is the former site of the the Olivet Church, which no longer exists. And just for clarity purposes, the staff report indicated that the property was designated at this time. It is not a designated heritage property. This minor variance application was deferred in November of 2017 to allow my client to submit a site plan application that is reviewed by staff prior to finalizing the variances. The site plan was submitted in April of 2018 under file number SP17-103, and that site plan application is substantially complete. The minor variances proposed to the committee today will facilitate the site plan approval process. The proposal by my client is for a modest intensification of the subject site for a one-story commercial building measuring approximately 480 square meters or 5,000 square feet. That is the building B located at the immediate intersection. The total GFA of the project after the proposed building B would be developed is 2,028 square meters, and the building B, the new building, would be set back 10 meters from the cemetery. That buffer being consisted of a 5-meter landscape, a strip, and a 5-meter wide patio. Variances are required to the maximum GFA, the landscape areas, the buildable area, and the location of the refuse storage. As this property is subject to a site-specific Schedule C, which outlines all those features. The Schedule C only contemplates the existing commercial building. A minimum of 107 parking spaces are proposed, consistent with the city's parent bylaw requirement for shopping centers over 2,000 square meters, which this proposal is. And the site-specific bylaw sets out a different site-specific parking requirement that contemplated the single building A. The property is designated and zoned to permit local serving commercial uses, and in our opinion, the minor variance application meets the 4 tests, represents good planning, and provides a superior urban design. We have read the staff report, Mr. Chair, and we note that the city and the region are supportive of the application. The city has recommended 6 conditions of approval. and my client advises that they are supportable of conditions 1, 2, 5, and 6. However, conditions 3 and 4, as in the staff report, are not supportable by my client. As it pertains to those conditions, I can address them now or wait until the committee's had opportunity to hear from planning staff.
I think we wait until staff has had an opportunity to present. Is that all, Mr. Bill? Good for now?
Pardon me, sorry?
Good for now, sorry?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions by committee members to the agent?
Not yet.
Okay, we'll hold off. Anyone in the audience here to speak on these applications? Ma'am, would you like to come forward and speak?
I've sent a letter to Jeannie already. Just at that particular corner, there's only two entrances.
Can I just get your name and
Oh,
address
sorry.
just for the record?
My name's Jane Smith. I'm a property owner, 8 Northumberland Place. Northumberland backs onto this particular plaza right now, one of the two low-density streets that backs onto that plaza. My concern is the coming and going from that particular plaza. There are only 2 entrances into it right now. Off in North Park going westbound, you can only get into it from one of those entrances going eastbound. So there is a slowdown of traffic as you're trying to proceed along North Park. Also southbound Dixie, there is no right-hand turn lane there. So if they were going to add an entrance, I don't know. There's no southbound lane. So the concern is traffic and the amount of congestion that would increase by putting this building into this particular lot. And I guess the number of children that are in the area and the number of walkers. Actually, that plaza needs a stop sign at one of those exits there because people come right out onto the sidewalk. But anyhow.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll see if staff can address any of those concerns. And I do have your letter, and it will be submitted for the record as well.
Okay, great,
Okay.
thanks.
Anyone else in the audience here to speak on this application? Ma'am?
Good morning. My name's Dawn Dunn. We're residents on Nottingham, another residential street that backs directly onto the plaza. And
Can I just get the
as
address just for the record, if you don't mind?
Dawn Dunn, 48 Nottingham.
Thank you.
And first of all, I was just wanted to inquire if both streets, Northumberland and Nottingham, did all residents on those streets receive notification? Because some neighbors have not received appropriate notification of this hearing today. So just wondering, I know we submitted some questions ahead of time, and hopefully all of them will be addressed today, but we did not get any formal response, I guess due to the holidays and the short time frame since we received the notification, due to the daycare center. It also provides a lot of access for school children heading down North Park. It's a very busy street, particularly at certain times of the day and evening, depending on school, religious sites, institutions that you have to take to filter out onto North Park again because, again, of the restricted entrance and exit. Also, maybe the city staff can address the impact to, the previous, I know it's not a historic site, but the previous site of the church and how they would commemorate that site, if at all, and the proximity to the cemetery also is a concern. So we haven't seen any staff reports since, in terms of their support or non-support of the site, but we'd be interested to hear more information before really condoning or going, feeling supportive of it.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you. I guess there's a lot of information that I guess staff will present when they speak, or if there are any other questions at that point in time.
Perfect.
In pertaining to the circulation, staff or the secretary treasurer will address that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Ma'am?
Can I just add to that? Because I spoke to my next door neighbor 2 days ago, and he had not received notice of this either. So,
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I can just clarify, the notices are circulated within a certain parameter around the subject site. May not necessarily mean that every resident on a particular street.
Construction,
Number 3, slight change to number 3 to wording that has been agreed to by Heritage, Zoning, Planning, and the consultant, to change it to that no permanent structure, excluding any patio, fencing, and any feature required to commemorate the property's heritage value shall be permitted within 10 meters of the cemetery. Number 4, that variance 3 regarding the refuse area be limited to the refuse storage requirements of the additional building, Building B. Number 5, that the owner finalize site plan approval under City File SP 17-103.000, execute a site plan agreement, and post any required financial securities and insurance to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Services. And finally, number 6, that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee shall render the approval null and void. Now, to try to answer some of the questions that have been asked of the public, I'll start off with the transportation issue that was noted along North Park and Dixie. There are no proposed entrances off of Dixie, neither on this plan or in the future. The North Park Drive, there is only the one left-hand turn lane into the site and the 2 right-in, right-out turning lanes into the site. This has been reviewed by our transportation planning staff, and they are satisfied with the current configuration of the entrances and exits from the site. With the concerns about the stopping behind the building, there are no changes proposed for the current building. So there are no changes around that building or the configuration of the parking or the landscaping or any of the uses within that current building. With respect to the commemoration, our heritage staff has reviewed this site plan extensively. We do require the 10-meter buffer from the cemetery, and this application is also being reviewed and being heard by the Heritage Board on January the 15th. At that time, any other additional details for this will be addressed. That's why the condition number 3 requires that no structures be located within 10 meters of the cemetery, but that would exclude a patio and fencing and a feature that would commemorate the property's heritage value. To address the comment that was received via email, I believe that their concern is mostly to do with the traffic around the rear of the building. Again, there's no proposed changes to that area, to the current structure, or to the landscaping, or to the fencing that's existing. And with respect to the applicants or the consultants' request to remove condition number 4, the rationale for that the refuse storage requirements for the additional building, Building B, only be for the Building B requirements is that no garbage or refuse that's required for building the existing building be utilize the refuse storage area that's being proposed. So no garbage is being transferred from the existing building to the new refuse storage area. I believe that completes all of my comments back to it regarding this.
Mr. Crouch?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. My recollection is the cemetery legislation provides for a bigger setback than 10 meters.
While this may be, I'm not exactly sure what the heritage
Not the heritage, the cemetery legislation.
I'm not sure what the cemetery legislation is. I'm sure that our heritage staff have looked over it extensively, and that the
In
10-meter
a Churchville application 10 years ago, we brought it to the attention of the heritage staff.
Okay,
I feel underinformed right now.
okay. So
How do I
you're
make
of the
a-
understanding?
How do I make a decision on a variance that may be prohibited by cemetery legislation?
Okay.
Mr. Dillon, just before you start, one question pertaining to the lighting that one of the residents brought up. Is that something that the city has a minimum, even though it's private property, is there a minimum standard that needs to be obtained? So that's one question. And then also, the one pertaining to the variance, and I guess we'll get into that, of the refuse, is this not stuff that would be dealt with within site plan, the site plan itself? Or is it something that, from staff's perspective, requires that additional variance? Or the condition, sorry.
Perhaps zoning can answer that question.
I can certainly comment on the condition. The location and configuration of the garbage and refuse room would certainly be dealt with through site plan. The use of that room, of course, is a functional operational consideration, and if there are limitations as suggested in planning staff report, that wouldn't be necessarily part of a site plan agreement. And if it was part of a site plan agreement, it's certainly not enforceable as a zoning restriction on the property. So if committee feels that this condition is appropriate for whatever reason, that's certainly something that would need to be added as a condition in this variance. I don't know how we would enforce it. I mean, certainly bylaw enforcement staff are not going to go through the refuse room to determine which garbage is which and how that's going to occur. But I suppose any observation of garbage being taken from one building to another might be proof of violation of that condition. Where that leaves us in terms of declaring it null and void after the building has been built, I don't know. But that's how it would be interpreted from a zoning perspective, not necessarily through site plan.
And on the minimum lighting component?
Lighting is not addressed through zoning bylaw. That would be something that would have to be included as a condition here.
Is there a minimum that we, as a city, require a private entity to have on a plaza?
Through the chair, lighting can be reviewed as part of a site plan application. It has not been requested at this point to do a lighting review for this plaza. It's only required in certain circumstances where staff have concerns with potential for lighting issues.
Okay. Any other questions by committee members? Mr. Domes, would you like to chime in?
Absolutely. I would like to touch first on the refuse area. There was also a concern by one of the residents of what it looks like. So the Schedule C in the site-specific bylaw had a refuse area. Dana, would you mind putting this lamp on the overhead there? I'm sure, Mr. Chair, if that overhead works. But while we're looking at it, just to the west of the existing building, the zoning schedule had a refuse area, which was an outside bin, one of those large container bins. What's being proposed now as part of the site plan application is that refuse area would be removed and relocated to be closer to the new proposed building, and it would be in the form of one of those underground storage units. Many people know them as Mullocks, but there's other firms that do that type of work as well. So those systems, if you've seen them, they're underground. There is a little dome that pops up out of the ground where people will throw their garbage in, but it's stored underground where it's supposed to stay cooler than if it's above grade. And if right by the 3 in the middle of the plan, committee members, there's a circle, and that is the proposed underground storage unit. So to answer the public's question, the refuse area is being relocated. In my opinion, it's being improved. It's being located away from, further away from residential units. It'll be located underground, and it's also going to be surrounded with a number of program landscape space. In terms of the condition number 4, I share some of the concerns or comments raised by Ms. Corzola. From my client's perspective and mine, it's going to be very difficult to enforce this condition with tenants. I understand that people will go naturally take the path of least resistance in most cases. What I fear is that a unit that might be very closer to the Mullock system puts a box or a garbage bag into the underground storage, and thus renders the committee's decision null and void because we're not abiding to those, to condition number 4. That's a very big concern for us, and I don't know how we would address it once the building again is developed. So it's an enforceable issue for my client with its tenants. I also see it as an issue with the city and its bylaw enforcement as well. Notwithstanding that, the proposal has been planned as a comprehensive development that will function as one complete entity. There is a garbage storage area inside of Building A. There will be that second refuse area with the underground Mullock system. People will use both of them. That's how the property's been planned. In terms of the heritage comment by committee member, the site plan application required a number of archaeological and heritage assessments being completed. They've been reviewed by city staff. We are going back to the Heritage Board. What the Heritage staff of the City of Brampton is recommending is that there be a 10-meter setback, which will include a heritage easement within that 10 meters and a heritage bylaw also incorporated for that portion of the property. So there is protection. That is the protection that's being proposed, that's been reviewed and vetted by city staff, that's been sent off in through the HIAs and archaeological assessments to the ministry. The ministry's come back and they haven't provided any concerns with what's been advanced to date as part of the site plan application.
Mr. Chair, if I may add to that, we have brought down our heritage planner if there are any specific questions as well regarding the setback to the cemetery.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Or Mr. Crouch, would you like?
Through you to Mr. Doucette, the heritage planner.
Okay.
What is the minimum setback pursuant to the cemeteries legislation?
Through the chair, I don't have the exact number, but it's under 5 meters from a burial site. So it's less than 5 meters, and there's guidelines that recommend an appropriate buffer but that's from a burial site, not from the abutting line of a cemetery. And in this case, we have reviewed the recommendation from the Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Sport as well through the archaeological assessment. So they have identified that the buffer is appropriate in this case with the patio encroaching in the 5 meter, and they recommended a 10 meter no construction zone from the property line that is, I believe, to the north, because that area was not assessed.
Do you recall what the setback was at Churchville Cemetery?
I don't recall through the chair.
My recollection is that 10 meters was proposed by the applicant Baldessara's company. I forget which number company it was.
Through the
and
chair,
that was actually extended.
Through the chair, when we start negotiation, we recommend an appropriate buffer, but there's no specific number. So sometimes we ask for 10 meters, but it's not a determined number. So it depends on a case-by-case basis in this case, because we reviewed the recommendation from once the archaeological assessments were prepared, that these buffers were appropriate. We deemed that with an encroaching 5 meter patio, it was acceptable, but in terms of mitigating, this is also why we believe that the designation of the property, well, not the whole property, but a portion of the property within that 10 meter and including the encroaching 5 meter patio, as well as a strip of land between building B and the street where the former Church of the Mount Olivet Cemetery was found, that this would also mitigate, because we would preserve that area in perpetuity. But in terms of 10 meter, it depends. It's a case-by-case basis, on a case-by-case basis, but it's not a determined number.
Thank you. In terms of the heritage easement that will eventually be registered, so that'll be a no-build zone, obviously, will it also provide for the the installation, the commemoration, and its maintenance?
Through the chair, that is correct, but this is not decided yet, so our intention is to bring a report forward to the next Brampton Heritage Board meeting,
Assuming the
recommending
bo-
designation and entering into a heritage easement agreement.
And that heritage easement that you'll recommend or otherwise to the Heritage Board would include a commemoration and its maintenance?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So to be clear, Mr. Domes, your only issue is with condition 4, or was there something else that you had highlighted?
There was originally two concerns, Mr. Chair. One was condition 4, which was the refuse area, and then the second one was condition 3, which is as written. As Mr. Dykstra had indicated, staff as well as us have agreed to a revised wording that Mr. Dykstra had read out to committee, and we are acceptable of that revised condition. So on the understanding that that would be acceptable in terms of condition 3, it just remains condition 4 that is a concern to my client.
Okay.
And we ask that it be removed.
Mr. Crouch?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the applicant. The underground refuse area, and it sounds like an improvement clearly, is it of a capacity that it could serve the whole plaza?
They come in various capacities. It's a relatively new kind of technology, but
I
it's
haven't
becoming
heard
more
of it
common.
before.
I believe, and I'm not an expert in the system, but I believe there's various sizes. But I think, I don't think that the one Mullock system, or whatever system equivalent, it would be large enough that's being planned to accommodate both building A and B. I have my client here, if you wouldn't mind hearing from him. He's been dealing with the waste service provider, and he might be able to give you more information on that.
Thank you.
My name is Pushup Jindal, the owner of AAA Holdings Limited. I have dealt with two
Can you,
companies.
sorry, sir, can you just repeat that for
My
the
name
record,
is
please?
Pushup Jindal, and I'm the owner of this property under AAA Holdings Limited.
Thank you.
I have dealt with two companies about this refuse area. One is Moloch and one is Earth Bin. Both of these bins are about 5,000 gallons. And present refuse area which we have in the present building occupies only 3,000 gallons. So this Moloch bin is way larger than what we already have in the present building. And I have considered the refuse which we generate now in present building, and as well as the new building which it will generate. And the waste companies both are of the view that this Moloch system is enough for serving both the buildings. And it also depends upon the frequency of the pickups. In case this system is overfilled, then we can increase the frequency of the pickup, which is very easy to do. As of now, we pick up every alternate day, but the frequency can be increased to every day in case we find that this bin is not enough to serve both the buildings. My problem here is when I hear about the condition that this new refuse area will be used only for the building B, it's a practical issue. How I'm going to stop my present tenants on the existing building not to go there? I can't be there 24 hours, and I can't stop that individual people not to go there. They will find it convenient way to get rid of their garbage. So my request is to not put that condition on that this building A people cannot go to the new Moloch system. Let them choose which way they want to get rid of their garbage.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions, committee members? So, Mr. Dykstra, would you like to speak to that? I mean,
Sure.
The unenforceable component is where I'm starting to feel
Right.
as well.
Through to the chair, the condition is that the refuse area be limited to the refuse storage requirements of the additional building. Not that people won't be able to use it necessarily, but that it's for the refuse storage requirements. So we don't want to have all of building A and building B using the Moloch system. We also want to be able to maintain the refuse storage that's currently existing in building A to be maintained. So that people in Building A do not necessarily have to use Building B's mullock system, because we don't necessarily want to have everybody from Building A trudging their garbage over to the Building B mullock system. So perhaps it might be advantageous to also add that we maintain the refuse storage in Building A to be added to that condition.
So fundamentally, the whole concept is that you do not lose the refuse that you have in Building A. That's
Correct.
If I may just add a comment in that regard, the proposed Moloch system, and I do note that they have a restaurant in there, and certainly a restaurant is permitted use. The proposed Molochs would not be permitted to accommodate restaurant waste. Restaurant waste is required to be maintained within within a climate-controlled area inside a building. And the Molochs, of course, are not inside the building. They are out, and certainly they are below ground and more appealing than a general garbage bin, and the associated issues are not present. But you would not be able to store restaurant waste in a Moloch system. So just in hearing Mr. Dykstra's comments about the use of the waste, the refuse areas not necessarily being the primary issue, you may want to consider adding or amending the condition to read that the existing refuse area associated with Building A be maintained and available for use by all tenants of both buildings. And that gives, obviously, tenants the flexibility to continue placing refuse in the area that is available now, in addition to the Moloch system that may be added as a result of this new site plan.
Mr. Crouch?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Dykstra, does that mean you'd want a smaller mullock system than 5,000 cubic yards?
That can be looked at through the site plan application. I'm not stating whether or not the size of the mullock system that will be required, but we'll definitely look at that through the site plan application.
Well, you say you can't say that, but your report says be limited to the refuse storage requirements of the additional building. So if that was only 2,000 cubic meters, then you'd be looking for less. Is that correct?
I think that if we found that the refuse storage requirements for Building B were 2,000, we'd probably want to limit it to within the range of about 2,000 then.
And the applicant's already suggested that 5,000 cubic, do you say yards, not meters, cubic meters is sufficient for the whole plaza. Do you have any idea?
I don't have that data. We haven't fully reviewed that.
Mr. Domas, did you have a comment?
Again, my preference is to not overly complicate things from an enforcement issue. But I will note that, for instance, if we're going to, first of all, let me understand completely what staff is asking for. Staff is asking for the existing garbage area in Building A to be maintained, which in principle is no problem. That's the intent. We would like to provide the ability for tenants to use either waste storage facility, if you want to call it that. And I think that's the intent. Let's, for example, imagine that in Building B, the new building, a Starbucks or something like that goes in there, or some kind of coffee shop or something, is a restaurant. And the restaurant, Mrs. Squirrelzalo is saying, cannot use the mullock, it has to go to the garbage area. So I want to make sure that if there is a restaurant in there, the condition does not preclude that Building B restaurant from using Building A, and I guess vice versa. So this is becoming, in my opinion, very confusing, which is not easy from an enforcement after the fact.
If the intent, and this is just not, as the discussion goes along, is that if the intent is just to maintain the refuse in Building A, would not that wording suffice? Is that refuse in Building A be maintained? Not that someone has to use A or B, but just, in fact, I understand the concept is that you do not want to eliminate Building A, so why do we not just keep that simplicity there?
Through the chair, I think that would be sufficient going forward from both planning and zoning perspective.
And that would work for us as well.
Okay, so, so simply stating that the refuse in Building A be maintained?
I can certainly reread the proposed condition for
Please.
your consideration. So what we would be doing is striking condition 4 as it currently reads and replacing it with the following, stating that the existing refuse area associated with Building A be maintained and available for use by all tenants of both buildings.
Fair?
And then there's no restriction obviously on the use of the second and newly created Moloch that
Okay.
would be associated with Building B.
And Mr. Domes was stating some changing in wording in condition 3 through staff and applicant.
That's the no permanent structures, excepting communication patio.
Is that, so can we just get that
Commemoration.
reread as well?
Through the chair, that condition 3 reads that no permanent structure excluding any patio, fencing, and any feature required to commemorate the property's heritage value shall be permitted within 10 meters of the cemetery.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So with the rewritten condition 4, if we're considering that, would the applicant still be required to install the Moloch for the underground storage?
Not necessarily, no.
So that would turn to site plan.
It would return to site plan. There's certainly variance being sought to the bylaw requirement that refuse be limited to the storage that where it's currently located. So there is a variance that's being approved to relocate and/or add an additional garbage and refuse area on this site.
And can the committee feel confident that that will be dealt with through the site plan without putting a positive condition in that he has to provide additional refuse?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions by committee members? Any other questions by anyone in the audience? Ma'am?
Yes, just wanted to try and clarify if the landlord has any indication of what kind of commercial is going to be going in there. Someone said Starbucks. Several years ago, there was an application for a drive-through Tim's to be installed there, and it was shut down right away because of the ridiculous traffic patterns that would be incurred on a secondary street. So from that point of view, I'm really concerned now after I heard that word, what is actually going to be going in there? Not that we wouldn't love to have a nice sit-down coffee shop in the neighborhood, but
Understood.
it would really impose something quite different for that corner. Also, several of the neighbors, another neighbor couldn't come, the Coffins, we all have direct sight lines to this site. We look out our kitchen window. Right now, there is just minimal chain link fence. Are we now going to be looking at a garbage site with a building that's got continual traffic? So that's another concern.
Okay, thank you. I'll get some sense. From the way I've seen this presented, the new building will only be on the anterior, on the front aspect of the site. So no change will be to what you're currently looking at, and correct?
Oh, yes. We
right?
still have a sight line to this area, this construction area. We still have a sight line.
A sight line, correct,
Yeah.
but it's going to be significantly further than what you're looking at abutting your
Yes,
property.
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. I guess generally those are the concerns that we
Okay,
have.
let's answer the use question, if you don't mind, from either staff or applicant. What restrictions are there on the uses that will be allowable in those buildings? Or in the new proposed building?
Right, so to answer that question, Mr. Chair, there's a site-specific bylaw that has certain parameters for different kinds of uses, medical, a restaurant, so there's limitations that are in the site-specific bylaw. We're not amending those as part of
So
this
whatever is allowed now,
is
there's
what we are-
not an increase in what's allowable?
Only in terms of the amount of gross floor area.
Space,
Yeah.
but not uses.
No, the reality is my client doesn't know what's going in Building B. I said Starbucks just because I just came from there, it's just an example. But I can assure the local resident that there's no drive-through being proposed. What you're seeing in this sketch is taken directly from the site plan application that is, I would say, 90% advanced, maybe even more. That's been vetted by all city departments. So there's clearly no drive-through as part of this, this proposal. It could be a coffee shop, it could be something else. We don't know at this point, but we have to work within the bylaw, and if that's not the case, then there's a process for that as we're looking at.
And I guess to staff, to let the resident, I guess, at ease, is that any traffic issues, anything pertaining to that would be looked at like any other application being put forward, correct?
Correct, and certainly the addition of any kind of drive-through facility would require site plan approval and consideration by our transportation planning staff. The kind of uses that are permitted on this site are limited to sort of local community commercial uses, including retail stores, drug stores, convenience stores, dining room, restaurant, which may include things like a Starbucks, but in this case, nothing is proposed per se. Banks are permitted, dry cleaning establishment, and certain offices, as I said, with limits on the amount of medical office that can be in there, which is generally the driver for higher volumes of traffic would be the medical, but there are prescribed limits in the zone for that use.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, if you wouldn't mind, just to answer another question for the public. The application's gone through 3 site plan submissions. The City of Brampton staff are very good at reviewing those, so you can expect a high degree of architectural design for the new building. So I think that it'll be an improvement to the local area.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Just one quick question to you, Mr. Chair, to the staff, more of a comment. In the event of site plan approval, if there's any change in the use or the owner is trying to bring something different, for example, any drive-through facility, so if in the event they do require any variance, so I'm sure they'll come back to us or to the committee for those future uses if it's not permitted right now, because as per my understanding, the staff is clearly indicating that the drive-through facility is not approved as of yet.
That's correct, and certainly to add a drive-through in this kind of configuration would result in, changes to the parking lot and reduction in the number of parking spaces available, and all of that, because this is a very prescriptive zone that, sets out parking areas and building areas. Any changes to the development of the site beyond what is seen on the screen right now would require a secondary variance. Likewise, the addition of any new uses that would not otherwise be permitted would also require a variance, much and similar to the day nursery that's currently in there was approved through a variance.
Thank you.
I have difficulty with the size of the site plan too. Under number 2, along that little strip of the easement, is there new landscaping requirements there, or is that existing to hide the building? So, is there any new planting required in here?
I can answer that question. On the overhead, you'll see a oblique view of the subject site. That area in 10 meters has been reviewed by staff's landscape people and staff heritage consultant. At the bottom right or middle right of your screen is the 10-meter easement area, the future 10-meter easement area. As you can see, there's minimal landscaping. In the concept plan, the landscape plan being advanced as part of the site plan application, that landscape is being increasingly updated with a number of new vegetation, both ground shrubbery and trees.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions, seeking a motion to proceed.
Motion to approve with the amended conditions.
By Mr. Chadha,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Nurse. All in favor? That carries. That is approved with the amended conditions as stated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Calling application A19-001, Inderjeet Kaur Kalaya. The property is located at 29 Kingswood Boulevard.
Good morning. My name is Alan Abunahla, represent the owner for 29 Kingsview Boulevard. We have two minor variances, which is the interior side setback of 1.6 meter to propose second-story addition. Requires by law, the minimum interior side yard setback is 1.8 to the second story. We have another second variances, which is the fence. We have, it's an existing fence. The maximum height is, we have 2.7 meter. By law, the maximum fence height of 2 meter.
Thank you. Anything else at this
No,
point?
that's it.
Any
Two
questions
variances.
by committee members to the agent? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are of the opinion that these two variances meet the 4 tests under the Planning Act. We're recommending approval with 4 conditions, which are the following. Number 1, that the applicant obtain mature neighborhood site plan approval to the satisfaction of the Commissioner of Planning and Development Services. Said approval is to include any servicing upgrades as required by the Regional Appeal, as well as city standard tree protection fencing of the canopy drip line of the city street tree in front of the property prior to any site work taking place. Number 2, that the extent of the variances for the interior side yard setback and height of privacy screening fence be limited to that shown on the sketch attached to the public notice. Number 3, that the variance related to the height of the existing fence, the privacy screen, be limited to the existing width or length and lattice-style construction type. And finally, number 4, that failure to comply with and maintain any of the conditions of the committee will render the approval null and void.
Any questions by committee members? Ma'am, have you had an opportunity to review those conditions
Yeah.
and agree to them?
Motion to approve with staff recommendations.
Seconded.
By Mr. Chadha, seconded by Mr. Crouch. All in favor? That carries. That is approved, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Calling application A19003, Pooja and Avtar Mandla. Property is located at 51 Metzak Drive.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pooja Mandla. I'm the property owner of 51 Metzak Drive, Brampton. And my request is for the 5 variances. The first one is to permit an interior side yard setback of 1.19 meter to an above upgrade side entrance, whereas by the law required a minimum interior side yard setback of 1.2 meter to an above grade side entrance. The second one is to permit a driveway width of 7.26 meter, whereas by the law permit a maximum driveway width of 6.71 meter. The third one is to provide a 0 point meter permanent landscape strip adjacent to a side lot line, whereas by the law required a minimum 0.6 meter with permeable landscape strip adjacent to a side lot line. The fourth one to permit a deck encroachment of 4.46 meter to the rear yard, resulting in a rear yard setback of 3.14 meter, whereas by the law permit a maximum deck encroachment of 3.0 meter, resulting in a rear yard setback of 4.6 meter. The fifth one is to permit a accessory structure gazebo having a height of 3.5 meter, whereas by the law permit a maximum height of 3.0 meter for the accessory structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions by committee members to the owner? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Through the chair, city staff are in support, in part, of this application, subject to the following conditions being imposed. Number 1, that the extent of the variances be limited to that shown on the sketch attached to the public notice. Number 2, that the above grade side entrance should not be used to access an unregistered second unit. Number 3, that the owner shall obtain a building permit within 90 days of the decision of approval. Number 4, that variance 2 be refused. Number 5, that variance 3 be refused. Number 6, that the wood pergola be removed within 90 days of the decision. Number 7, that the existing gazebo be limited to 3 meters by 3 meters and be located as identified in the public notice. And number 8, that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee shall render the approval null and void.
Thank you. Ma'am, have you had an opportunity to review those conditions?
Sorry?
Have you had an opportunity to review those conditions? Do you understand those conditions?
Yeah, I do.
And do you agree to them?
Yes, and this is for the first time. I'm kind of a little bit nervous, and I really don't know what I have to do it, so if you can guide me, guys, so I'm gonna be really helpful.
Staff, could you just kind of, so for clarity, what I see here, the wood pergola needs to be removed.
Yes, we're gonna do that.
You understand that?
Yes,
Then variants 2 and 3 pertaining to the driveway width and the permeable strip.
yes.
Those will not be, staff is not in support of that.
Okay.
So there will have to be alterations. Now, I ask it as a question to staff, because on my site inspection, I did note that there seem to be 2 trees on both sides. Does that then, even though, assuming this is not, that they are refused, but will there have to be alterations made physically? Because I don't know what the measurement is between the trees, so does that,
The measurement of the driveway width was actually taken in between the trees, because of course you can't park the vehicle
Right.
on the outside of the trees. The lot has been paved in its entirety with the exception of a few little circles surrounding the trees. So the removal of at least 0.6 meters of that concrete on both sides of the lot would be required in order to meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw.
so that's, to answer your question, that's what would have to be
Okay,
done.
I have one question, sorry. Because those ones, we didn't do any changes. It was as it is when we bought the house. We didn't do any structures or any damage, whatever it was there, because there was a reason behind it, like we don't want any grass in our front yard or in our backyard because my daughter, she's allergic to grass. So that's why we did it. But that's a separate thing, like that's excuses, I'm gonna prefer that. But we didn't do any structure because there was a break and everything, so we changed it because it was all damaged, so we repair it. Basically, we just repair it.
And that's often the case, is that you inherit something that's potentially there. That being said, that doesn't excuse the actual bylaws that are required.
Okay.
That being said, it does not have to be grass. It does have to be landscape and something permeable. You can inquire from staff what that would include.
Okay.
But essentially, the deviation or the removal of the concrete, and this is something that you would have to, get some information from staff, so where you'll be 100% within your, so that you're meeting the bylaw.
Okay,
Okay, but your intentions are to do that.
yes.
Again, staff has indicated and put forward some conditions, so I guess I'll just ask you again, so you understand those conditions now,
Yes.
and do you agree to
Yes,
those
I do.
conditions?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Just, through you, Mr. Chair. A question to the staff, and on December 5th council meeting, there was a motion approved by the council regarding the driveways. Any complaint between September 1st to December the 5th to be placed on hold. So any decision made today on these driveways, how we are going to look into those ones?
I can confirm that there's currently no enforcement action on this property with respect to the driveway. Fulfilling the condition of the committee's decision, obviously, there's no condition associated with this decision that would require the landscaping to be reinstated with any kind of time frame. Being the winter months, obviously, the planting of materials is not really feasible at this time in any event. The decision that you would be making today simply acknowledges that the variance is not approved. So there's no time frame associated with replacing and or complying with the zoning bylaw.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, for example, this committee is going to make any decision now and down the road, because I read those minutes for the council meeting. It says there will be a report will be presented to the council in the new year, in the first quarter of 2019. So in that case, if the bylaws are going to be changed regarding the driveway widening, so how this committee's decision is going to be I would say, finalize, or like if today something is made here in this committee and then down the road the bylaws are going to be changed?
So if the applicant does not make the required changes before the bylaw is amended, if the bylaw is amended, they would need to comply with the bylaw as written today. However, I want to reiterate, there's no requirement in your decision or the imposition of a time frame in order to comply with the zoning bylaw with respect to the driveway. So there's really no pressure on the applicant to make those changes within any kind of time frame, and certainly not before, if they wanted to wait until, council has had an opportunity to revisit the issue of driveway width and/or the requirements for permeable landscaping in the front yard. That's something that they certainly have the ability to do. Like I say, there's no condition for them to clear that would be associated with the approval of the other variances that you might be approving today.
Any other questions? Seeking motion to proceed?
Motion to approve in accordance with the staff report.
By Mr. Crouch, seconded by Mr. Nurse. All in favor? That carries. So this application is approved with the conditions that are set forth in staff's recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Calling application Kamaljeet Kaur Mander, properties located at application A 19004, properties located at 108 Cherry Tree Drive.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. I'm Karanjit Kaur Brad and address is 86 Delwater Crescent. I'm here on behalf of my sister Kamaljeet Kaur Mander. She is owner of 108 Cherry Tree Drive. She is here for 2 variances. She received staff report. She is okay with this report except recommendation number 1 regarding her driveway width difference, which is less than half feet. The driveway she extended that is not to park any extra car or vehicle. It's just for her kids to get out of the car and go inside. She is single mom and raising her kids. So please allow her driveway as is. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions by committee members to the owners and agent? Seeing none? Sorry, Mr. Crouch?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the agent, does your sister realizes she's going to have to get a building permit for this entrance into the home?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Does your sister realize she'll have to get a building permit for the work that's already been completed for the entrance into the home?
On condition number 2, staff is asking and making it clear that one of the conditions would be that you obtain a building permit. So Mr. Crouch is just asking, do you understand that that is an obligation if we do proceed with this as well?
I raise it because I have noted that the construction of that entrance is not very sightly. And sightly usually indicates it might not be structurally sound.
Okay.
Might be a lot of work to fulfill this adjustment.
That's why we allow like as is, because she's single mom and she has to cost for fixed and everything, so that's why we allow as is for her.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But again, just to be clear, if this proceeds, a building permit will be required, and Mr. Crouch is just highlighting that doesn't mean that what is there may necessarily be safe. It may have to have significant costs and improvements in order to do that, just to make it safe for yourself and your family as well.
Okay.
So, just to highlight that.
Okay.
Is there anyone in the audience here to speak on on this application? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff are of the opinion that variance 2 regarding the driveway width does not meet the 4-part test under the Planning Act. We are of the opinion that the other variance does meet the requirements. Our recommendation is therefore that the application is supportable in part, subject to the following conditions. Number 1, that variance 2 to allow an existing driveway width of 7.14 meters be refused. Number 2, that the applicant secure a building permit for the existing below-grade entrance within 60 days of the final date of the decision of the committee. Number 3, that the below-grade entrance not be used to access an unregistered second dwelling unit. Number 4, that drainage on adjacent properties not be adversely impacted. And number 5, that failure to comply with and maintain any of the conditions of the committee will render the approval null and void.
Thank you. So I'm going to just chime in with my thoughts. I believe in terms of the driveway, which we deal with all the time, in this case, from a committee's perspective, from my perspective, the spirit of what we're trying to enforce is there. I don't see it being excessive. I don't see it being drastic by no means. I don't see any permeable aspect. I don't believe that there's anything being impeded on that. So I would not be in support of refusing to. I would be in support of supporting it in its entirety. Just for the sheer fact of we have so many of these driveway issues that do come forward, and I know we've often saw things different from my perspective and committee and staff's perspective. And the philosophy of just no, I don't think meets what we of a committee should be doing. It should be looked at, or should be looked at on an individual basis. So in this case, I think it is one of those scenarios that does meet, because we see some horrible ones, and this is not one of those from my perspective. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that before we proceed.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I tend to agree with you, as I don't see that for extra car parking space or something, and they still have space beside that small strip, and it's just a little over a foot. So I do agree with you that this is not those typical scenario where the big time somebody has poured the concrete, and we often refuse through this committee many times.
Any questions? Any other questions or comments? Ms. Corzola, just as a question, and I know it's not necessarily enforceable, is that if we include conditions in these scenarios that the parking spaces are limited to 2, we include it as a condition just so that it makes it clear to the homeowner that that is a condition. Is that something that, from your perspective, I don't want to put you on the spot, but would be supportive of, or it's just something that we're being redundant to be including?
It's certainly something that you could include if you wanted to include a condition that would perhaps say there shall be no parking of motor vehicles on the extended width beyond the permitted maximum 6.71 meters. I do note in this case it's really just curbing on both sides of the driveway that has resulted in the excess width. The curbing is clearly of a different material, so you could go so far as to condition that there shall be no parking on the additional concrete surface on either side of the asphalt driveway. And in that case, if bylaw enforcement did go out and they observed parking, and a lot of times they will even see, tire marks on the concrete, so we know for a fact that somebody is parking there, and or oil leakage, things like that. That is something that we've pursued as far as in enforcement. So it certainly would be something that we could consider.
Because I would be supportive of that philosophically, is that as long as no one is parking there or not abusing the actual aspect of granting it potentially, including that as a condition would be something that I would be able to support, and then I leave it to the committee to decide how we proceed. Ms. Jenkins?
Mr. Chairman, just for clarity, we would like to raise an issue that was brought up related to the fire hydrant that's on the site right now. They do not meet the minimum distance to a driveway for the fire hydrant. We didn't include that in the staff report because it's not really a zoning issue, it's more fire prevention. And they have also extended the driveway onto city property, not just their own property. So if it is the intent of the committee to amend this condition in some way, we'd appreciate if you could take those 2 factors into consideration, that they don't have the right to do it on the city property, and we do have a hydrant issue, the distance to the hydrant.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, I've been corrected here.
Just for clarification, an owner may extend the width of their driveway on the city boulevard, provided they do not exceed the maximum permitted width of a driveway as prescribed by the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw does include that portion of the driveway that's on city boulevard. But acknowledging that in this case, it's done so that it is too close, according to another set of regulations, to the fire hydrant that's currently there.
What is a fire hydrant regulation?
1.45.
1.5 meters.
There's 1.5, I'm just looking at a photograph that I took while I was there. It's hard to gauge, but 1.5 doesn't look that it actually, even the asphalt meets the 1.5.
That was our understanding that they didn't meet it in the first place, but they have now increased the deficiency. And perhaps you'd like it on the screen just to.
Through you, Chair, I don't even see that, again, I'm in support of not to extend any of the concrete on the city property, but I don't see anyone being parked on the boulevard portion with that small strip, in my opinion.
I understand the concerns in terms of the fire hydrant, other than the fact that the 8 or 10 inches, from my perspective, doesn't really alter. I mean, it diminishes, but doesn't alter drastically what was the condition regardless. But again, that's just my 2 cents on that. So I guess we've had some dialogue on it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. So if we don't follow the staff report, and we approve this concrete, but provided the driveway is only for 2 parking spots, then the concrete would no longer be a driveway. Is that correct?
It would be a driveway as defined in the bylaw. You would simply be limiting the use of that excess driveway width and excluding a vehicle from parking on it. That is essentially what it is, but by definition, it still counts towards part of the driveway.
So in the city-owned boulevard, would the applicant have to remove the concrete if we approved the adjustment, provided that it can't be used for parking?
No.
It would still have,
It could be maintained.
it could be maintained,
Yeah.
notwithstanding the fact it's not a driveway. And it
That's
is
correct.
And it is a structure in the boulevard.
That's correct, yes. Unless there are some issues with respect to any kind of encroachment, as I state, the apron of the driveway that extends onto the city's boulevard is permitted to be there, provided obviously it's well maintained, it doesn't pose a trip hazard, it's not an encroachment of any kind. I'm uncertain of where the required setback from a fire hydrant is legislated. I suspect perhaps in the Ontario Fire Code, but that would be an issue that perhaps the fire department would need to address if they felt it was necessary, if that somehow impeded access to their fire hydrant.
Sorry, Mr. Crouch, I do note also, when I'm looking at this, the actual orientation of the actual house and how it actually funnels pie shapes, if you will, and making it a little bit more difficult to actually meet the restrictions that we have in place anyway. But, Mr. Crouch, go ahead, sorry.
No, that's okay. Nothing to add.
Nothing to add? Okay, so with our dialogue, just looking for a motion then to proceed, if there is nothing else or any other conclusions.
Motion to support staff's recommendation. All we have is the 4 tests.
Okay.
And I don't think this right-of-way meets any of the 4 tests.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Nurse.
Seconded.
Seconded by Mr. Crouch. All in favor? 2, 4, and 2 dissenting, Ms. Myers.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we will have to raise another motion because we have to carry forward until we break that tie
Okay.
in accordance with new legislation.
Okay. Do we have another motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to, but I would ask staff to, if they can provide us some wording for the variance number 2, the recommendation number 1, because I would like to put forward to support as is for the driveway. As I see, there's no component for permeable landscape, so that makes, and since this is not for extra car parking or anything.
So would you like the inclusion of the condition, as Ms. Corazzola had indicated, of no driving on or parking on the concrete portion?
Sure, if as long owner is fine with that, through you, Mr. Chair, if the only reason I do like to put that condition, but at the same time, if you can ask them if they do understand what is that, so then I can definitely add that.
Well, just for clarity, ma'am, where the committee member is putting forward a potential condition of keeping everything as is, but no parking. So at no point are you allowed to park on the concrete portion. If at any point in time, potentially, and it's the enforceability may be difficult, but if an enforcement officer saw you parked on the concrete, you would be subjected to potentially a ticket. Ms. Corazzola, is that correct?
Not a ticket per se, but they would be in violation of the zoning bylaw and could be prosecuted through the courts as a result.
Okay, so it would be potentially even worse than a ticket then. So would that be something that you would agree to at this point in time?
Yeah, we agree.
Okay.
If we can just add, and the variance would be null and void, meaning the
Absolutely.
approval for the below-grade entrance would not occur. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure what particular wording we're going to be formulating for that condition.
If I may assist, just to draft it up for your consideration through the chair, that the extended driveway width consisting of concrete curbing on both sides shall not be parked upon by the whole or a part of a motor vehicle and shall be maintained as residential landscaping only.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Corazzola, so that need to be read as recommendation number 1?
It could certainly replace, yes, condition number 1 that is currently stating that variance 2 shall not be.
Okay, so,
And then thus, number 5 is sufficient because failure to would then.
It's already there.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would like to put forward this motion with this amended recommendations. In this recommendations, the recommendation number 1 to be removed and the new wording, and then remaining 4, second, third, fourth, and fifth to be as is. So that's my motion.
Okay. Do we have a second there?
I'll second that. I'm reluctant to any driveway widening, but this is the least offensive we've seen this year for the last couple of years.
Okay. All in favor? That carries, that is approved. So to be clear, ma'am, the conditions then have been agreed to, and then you will still be subject to a building permit that will be a requirement of the approval. Okay?
And through you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair, I'm just clarifying that member Nurse has dissented on that decision.
That's right.
Calling application A19-005, Vicky Kennard. Property is located at 156 Mill Street South.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and member of committee. My name is Roberto Valente of Valente Castudio, 20 Gambit Avenue. I'm a designer and agent of the owner of 156 Mill Street South. The variance relates to a deck encroachment of 2 meters into the front yard, resulting in a front yard setback of 6.0 meters. The maximum encroachment permitted is 1.5 meters with a minimum setback of 8.0 meters to any lot line abutting the street. The characteristic of the lot is very similar to many lots around the property, as all the property have a porch located in the front yard. We consider that the reduced front yard setback doesn't adversely affect the surrounding properties or neighborhood in general, and it would remain sufficient amount of landscaping in the front yard. We believe that our application for approval of this minor variance is a reasonable request and do satisfy the 4 tests set out in the Section 45(1) of the Planning Act.
Thank you, sir. Any questions by committee members to the agent?
None.
Seeing none? Anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none? Staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff have reviewed the application, find that it meets the 4 tests in the Planning Act, in our opinion, and we are in support of it, subject to 2 conditions. The first being that the extent of the variances be limited to that shown on the sketch attached to the public notice, and that the design of the deck be generally in accordance with the drawing titled Front Elevation, Drawing A202, prepared by Valente Studio, dated November 26, 2018, is attached to this report, and that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee shall render the approval null and void.
Thank you. Sir, you agree to those conditions?
agree.
Okay. Seeking a
Through you,
motion to
Mr.
proceed?
Chair.
Oh, sorry, Mr.
Is a
Crouch.
building permit required for this porch?
Yes.
Should that not then be a condition?
It is certainly implied as a condition, it is a requirement, that since it's not built, building staff would normally not mandate it as a condition within a
Oh,
certain
I see,
period of
that's
time.
the distinction.
But yeah, that's the distinction here.
Thank you.
Comfortable?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Mr. Crouch, seconded by Mr. Nurse. All in favor? That carries. That is approved, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Calling application A18151, Shahat Anjara and Meena Sharma. The property is located at 11043 Heritage Road.
Dana, sorry, can you just step? Thanks. Good morning, Chair, members of committee, staff, members of the public. My name is Andrew Walker. I'm Principal Planner with Gagnon Walker Domes. I'm here today on behalf of Chahat Hari Sharma and Jana Mishra and Meenu Sharma, registered owners of the property known municipally as 11043 Heritage Road, which is located on the east side of Heritage Road, north of Wanlands Drive. The subject site is approximately 1.19 hectares or 2.96 acres in size, with approximately 141.7 meters or 464.9 feet of frontage along Heritage Road, and is occupied by a single detached residential dwelling and a freestanding building/garage. Access to the site is from Heritage Road. Subject site is surrounded primarily by agricultural uses, including residential as well as commercial enterprise to the east. We're seeking the following 3 variances. 1, to permit a place of worship to operate from the existing detached garage for a temporary period of 5 years. Secondly, to permit parking in the rear yard. And third, to permit a minor variance to interim control bylaw 306-2003 to permit the temporary use of the property as a temporary place of worship for a period of 5 years. The application seeks to permit the existing adaptive reuse of the existing freestanding building and garage as a place of worship, as I mentioned, for a temporary period of 5 years. The gross floor area of the existing building from which the place of worship operates is 162 square meters or 1,750 square feet. And the existing residential dwelling that's located on the property will continue to be used for residential purposes. The permanent approvals for a place of worship, including any new building for the use, will be pursued at a later date through the appropriate participation in the Heritage Heights secondary plan process, as well as any appropriate planning approvals, approval applications. On September 8, 2018, a minor variance application was filed with the city. The original concept plan identified the proposed temporary place of worship within the existing building frame of the freestanding building, with no additional building gross floor area being proposed. At that time, 2 vehicular access points and a small parking area was proposed. In response to comments received from the city and the public, we've made revisions to the concept plan, which is now before you today, and I have a copy up on the screen. Changes that were made to the plan can be summarized as follows. There's the elimination of the proposed second driveway and parking lot between the freestanding building garage and Heritage Road. Utilization of the existing driveway to Heritage Road, including a slight widening to 6.0 meters to accommodate two-way traffic, with proposed parking spaces located along the access driveway. A smaller parking area in front of the freestanding building garage with additional parking provided in the area between the garage and the existing residential dwelling, and proposed vegetative planting along the driveway and parking area in front of the freestanding building to provide visual screening from Heritage Road. The subject site is designated Northwest Brampton Urban Development Area and Corridor Protection Area on Schedule A, General Land Use Designation, in the official plan and its zoned agriculture and zoning bylaw 270-2004. In addition, the subject site is governed by interim control bylaw 306-2003. We acknowledge that in order to facilitate the temporary use of the site for a place of worship, an exemption to interim control bylaw 306-2003 will also be required. A request for exemption was filed with city staff on August 10th, and I'll speak to the interim control bylaw separately later in my presentation. With regard to the first test, conformity to the intent of the official plan, it is noted that the proposed / existing land use is for a place of worship within the existing freestanding building that is to remain in situ, and that the role and function of the existing dwelling as well as the surrounding lands will be maintained. As noted earlier, the subject site is designated Northwest Brampton Urban Development Area. Section 4.15 notes that lands within the Northwest Brampton Urban Development Area represents the city's main source of greenfield lands to meet anticipated growth within the city of Brampton to the 2031 planning horizon. More specifically, the aforementioned area is planned to be a compact, complete, and connected community that is well designed, contains a mix of housing for people in all stages of life, offer a range of employment opportunities, and provide shopping and community services that meets the needs of residents and businesses. The proposed place of worship serves to assist in meeting the goal of providing community services to meet the needs of residents as part of a complete community. It should be noted that there are three other existing places of worship that exist within the area that's currently designated Northwest Brampton Urban Development Area in the official plan. Land use designation and related development will be determined through a comprehensive planning process, including secondary plans and block plans. This process is currently underway and is known as the Heritage Heights Secondary Plan. The variance being sought today is for a temporary approval of a place of worship, which aligns with the June 2014 City of Brampton Council endorsed vision plan for the future Heritage Heights Secondary Plan, which identifies the subject site as a place of worship. The proposed variance and use poses no constraints to the long-range planning for the surrounding area and provides an opportunity for a land use that is envisioned by the city to be established in the interim period. Further, as mentioned before, no new building is being proposed, and the adaptive reuse of the existing building requires minimal capital investments. I'm of the opinion that the variance meets the general intent of the official plan. With regard to the zoning bylaw, the agricultural zone does not permit a place of worship. In the case of this proposal, the owners request permission for the existing freestanding building to be utilized as a place of worship with adequate parking for worshipers and visitors. The proposal does not envisage any new buildings or structures being erected. The immediate area is dominated by agricultural and residential uses, and as noted previously as evidenced by the June 2014 vision plan, that residential, institutional, and business employment uses are envisaged for the lands within the vicinity of the subject site. The proposed use and variances being requested will not impose a greater inherent impact on the surrounding properties. The proposed use will also not negatively impact the ultimate road network or future potential transportation corridor. I'm of the opinion that the general intent of the zoning bylaw is maintained. The site is large enough to accommodate the proposed use, as well as the existing residential use of the property with appropriate setbacks and screening from neighboring properties. In addition, the proposed use is reflective of the way the land use is envisaged by the City of Brampton. The proposed variance is not excessive or out of character with the area context and will not hinder the advancement of the Heritage Heights Secondary Plan process. temporary approval for 5 years will allow the city an opportunity to reevaluate the proposal in terms of its impacts, as well as the continued advancement of the Heritage Heights secondary plan process, of which my client intends to fully participate in. In this regard, the proposal is considered desirable and appropriate for development of the site. As I noted previously, the site is large enough to accommodate the proposed use, has appropriate setbacks, reflects the way the land use is envisaged, is temporary in nature, and the role and function of the existing dwelling, as well as the surrounding lands, will be maintained. In this respect, the application is considered minor. I'll now address the interim control bylaw and the requested exemption to that bylaw. As I noted previously, an exemption request was filed with the city on August 10th, of 2018. Interim control bylaw 306-2003 was enacted to protect lands in West Brampton from development to protect for a future higher order transportation corridor, commonly referred to as the North-South Transportation Corridor, or the GTA West Corridor. Excuse me. In February 2018, the province canceled the GTA West Corridor and commenced a further study known as the Northwest GTA Corridor, although in the recent fall economic statement by the current government, the GTA West Corridor is being revived. The location of the building and proposed place of worship use is not impacted by the Northwest GTA Corridor route study and area. I'm just going to pop a quick plan. So, thanks, Elizabeth. This plan was also part of the resubmission package. As you can see, the purple area is was the newer Northwest GTA Corridor identification study, and the subject site is identified in red, just to the right of that purple line, and where the existing freestanding structure is. It is on the furthest part of that property that's not impacted by that purple line. City staff provided a response letter to the exemption request dated September 26, 2018. We've had a chance to undertake a fulsome review of the letter, and our resubmission letter dated December 10, 2018 includes our detailed comments and observations in support of the exemption, which forms part of the relief being sought by variance number 3. In response to logistical challenges in securing comments and timing associated with planning committee and council meetings, staff consented to 2 prior deferrals, allowing us an opportunity to undertake a fulsome review, as I noted, as well as correspondence that we received at previous committee meetings from neighbors with an interest in the application. In this respect, as noted in the exemption response letter by policy planning staff, the variance seeking an exemption to the interim control bylaw was added with the application resubmission dated December 10, 2018. In the exemption request letter, response letter, city staff noted that when evaluating an exemption request, staff acknowledged that the criteria are not mutually inclusive, are intended to be applied only as appropriate, and are to be considered in the context of the potential constraint on the long-range land use and infrastructure planning for the surrounding area. In evaluating the exemption request, staff noted that the proposal satisfies 3 of the 5 criteria, being that one, that requests should relate to uses that are temporary or transitory in nature. 2, that any new buildings proposed are to be temporary, non-permanent structures requiring minimal capital investment or reusable. And 3, that consideration be given to the existing development pattern or settlement pattern. Staff noted that the exemption request failed the remaining 2 criteria, being 1, that any addition to existing buildings must be minor in scale and intended to only facilitate the current activity or use of the building. In regard to this criteria, staff noted that the request proposed converting an existing detached garage into a place of worship, and as such failed the criteria. And the second criteria was that consideration be given for existing environmental or physical constraints on or within the vicinity of the subject lands, seeking the exemption as it relates to the proposed potential corridor. And staff note in this respect that given the significant amount of uncertainty surrounding potential corridors for this area, and that the temporary application is intended to lead into a permanent approval, the request failed the criteria. With respect to the first one, We believe that the exemption request satisfies the general intent of the criterion, as the proposed temporary use will occupy the existing freestanding building garage, which is located on the site. A building expansion is not proposed, and that the existing dwelling will continue to be utilized for residential purposes. With respect to the second criterion, again, we believe that the exemption request satisfies the general intent, as the recent identification by the province of Ontario that work on the former GTA West corridor will resume. It is anticipated that once work resumes, it will take at least 3 to 5 years to complete. Elizabeth, sorry, let me just get one more, couple of slides to put up here. On this plan here, actually just flip it a quarter turn to the left, the other way. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, perfect. And then we're just up at the top there. Yeah. On this plan here, we've superimposed alignment option 2C, which is the sort of the pinkish dashed line that goes through there. There is also a dashed arrow. That dashed arrow is what's on the June 2014 council endorsed land use vision plan, and option 2C from the GTA West corridor alignment options generally aligns with what is shown on the plan. We've also superimposed option 2C on this plan, as it's the one option alignment that comes the closest to the subject site. And as can be seen on the plan, option 2C is outside the limits of the subject site. Once the EA study is complete, it will likely take another 3 to 5 years for construction to commence. There is a minimum 6 to 10 year window where the subject site could be used on an interim or temporary basis. Staff also opined that the Northwest GTA corridor conflicted with the subject site, as noted previously with the fall economic statement by the government. The Northwest GTA corridor study is being suspended and the GTA West corridor being resumed. In this case, these comments are no longer applicable. However, even if they were, the comments neglected to indicate that the Northwest GTA corridor only traverses the site's frontage immediately abutting Heritage Road. The existing structures are both located outside of the Northwest GTA corridor alignment, as I had shown on the previous slide. Toward this end, the variances meet the interim control bylaw exemption criteria on the basis that they are 1, minor in nature, 2, do not propose any additional buildings or extensions to existing buildings, 3, do not hinder transportation or infrastructure corridor planning, and 4, do not hinder long-range planning for the Heritage Heights secondary plan area. This concludes my presentation. I'll address some comments on the city staff report following the introduction of the report on the public record, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Committee members, any questions to the agent? Seeing none. Sorry, Mr. Crouch.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So at the last meeting in the deferral, I thought we gave you a deferral so you get in front of planning committee, and you chose not to?
So from that last committee meeting, the city went ahead and canceled the December planning committee meeting. So there was no planning committee meeting available to us between that committee date and today. And secondly, I had asked about a delegation to the December 12th council meeting, and I was advised by city staff that they weren't accepting any delegation requests, as that council meeting was intended to be a training session only. However, after the fact and after the resubmission, because we had to meet a particular timing for today's meeting for a resubmission package, I then reviewed the agenda for that December 12th date, and there was clearly A, delegations, and B, reports that were being considered on various applications. So I was misled in terms of not being able to delegate to that meeting. So those two things were not able to happen, and so we took policy planning staff's advice in their response letter, which was to add the exemption request to the interim control bylaw as a variance to the application.
I'll listen to staff then, perhaps. Thank you.
I'll wait for most of my comments until after, but is this area is a rural area? This is not a serviced area?
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions at this point?
No.
Is there anyone in the audience that is here to speak on this application? Sir, would you like to come forward?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman,
Good morning, sir.
committee. I live to the east of the property, and last summer when they...
Sorry, sir, just your name and
Oh, I'm
address for the
John
record.
Doan.
Sorry?
John Doan,
And address, sir?
2440 Wanless Drive.
Thank you. Just for the record, sir.
Okay. And when they first started their services last year, they the noise that was coming from the property all hours of the evening, and for a week in August we could hear the bass in our house from their speakers, and went for 7 days straight, starting 10 in the morning, ending 9 at night. But there's been other weekends where the noise goes into like 2 o'clock in the morning. And on their advertisement, they talk about serenity and peace, and I'm not sure whose peace and serenity that is. And it is an agricultural area. I pasture cows to the north of that property, and last summer they threw a log over onto my fence, letting my cows get out. And I'm afraid that if they have 150 people running around, there'll be more situations like that. And also we have no sewer lines out there, so we're all on septic systems. And my parents actually built that house, and the septic system was meant for a single family, not 150 people or more. And we're also on well water out there. And so you get that many people using those services, it'll make the water table probably drop and affect everybody in that area. And also, our properties are in the transportation corridor. I'm not sure about the map, but I know we are in that transportation corridor. We're not on the edge of it, we're right in the middle of it. And that's all I wanted to make my concerns.
Thank you, sir. Any questions, committee members? No? Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none? Staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff have reviewed the application against the floor tests outlined in the Planning Act and are recommending that the 3 variances being sought by the applicant be refused on the basis that the existing place of worship has raised concerns from a land use compatibility perspective, does not conform with the policies of the official plan, does not conform with the intended land use permissions of the zoning bylaw, is not desirable for the appropriate development of the land, and the requested variances are not minor in nature.
Thank you. Any questions, committee members, to staff? Seeing none, any other comments or questions at this time? Mr. Crouch?
Mr. Chair, I find this application to continue to be premature with the complex planning that has to take place in the Northwest, and as soon as neighbors complain about sound and/or septic, I'm not prepared to call this minor at all.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay. That's one of the reasons, and I guess it was reinforced. The issue of no services is a concern to me, when you're including X amount of people. That's number one. But more importantly, the one where is in the prohibition of this interim bylaw is that, if we were looking at a couple of minor issues, but I don't think we're satisfying the tests here adequately enough to go against a sheer prohibition, and that's where I'm torn. So that's where my mindset is as well. Committee members, any other questions or comments?
I do share your concerns, Chair, regarding the services.
Okay. Any motions to proceed?
Motion to refuse.
Motion to refuse by Mr. Crouch, seconded by Mr. Nurse. All in favor? That carries. This application is refused, sir. Obviously, you do understand the appeal process.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there, if there's no other comments, questions, seeking a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Mr. Chada, seconded by Mr. Crouch. All in favor? It carries. Motion, meeting is adjourned.